Billionaire laughed while signing the divorce papers, but her lawyer handed her a briefcase, saying, "Your mother gave me this 10 years ago." When she opened it, everyone in the room froze in shock. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to your own family channel, Mr. Peter Stories. May the Almighty bless every woman with peace that calms every storm, courage that never breaks, and a light so divine it guides generations. May your hearts bloom with kindness, your voices carry wisdom, and your love remain the heartbeat of every home. You are the soul of compassion, the power behind every miracle, and the reason this world still shines with hope. But my beloved family, why the silence? One like, one comment. It's your love that keeps this family alive. Even if YouTube dims our reach, our unity will outshine every shadow. This is mission 1,000 likes, for every woman whose faith stands tall and whose heart never stops loving. If your heart is true, like the video, if your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." The sound of Curtis Slewa's laughter filled the conference room like poison gas, seeping into every corner, choking the air, until Lupita Long thought she might stop breathing altogether. She sat frozen across the mahogany table, watching his hand glide across the divorce papers with the smooth confidence of a man signing autographs for adoring fans. This was it, the end of everything she had believed in, wrapped up in legal language and witnessed by strangers who had no idea they were watching a woman's soul being torn apart while her husband smiled like he had just won the lottery. You know what the best part is? Charid. Curtis leaned back in his leather chair, his perfect teeth gleaming under the cold fluorescent lights. His designer suit probably cost more than most people made in a month, tailored to emphasize the shoulders of a man who had never done real physical labor in his life. I get to start fresh, clean slate, no baggage, no dead weight dragging me down anymore. Lupita's hands trembled in her lap. She wanted to speak, wanted to scream, wanted to ask him how 10 years of marriage could be reduced to nothing more than baggage in his mind. But her voice had abandoned her weeks ago, around the time she discovered he had been planning this divorce for months, while still kissing her goodnight and telling her everything would be fine once the money situation improved. Patricia, Curtis's lawyer, slid another stack of papers across the glossy surface. The woman's eyes were cold and efficient, the kind of person who had probably stopped seeing human suffering as anything more than billable hours. "Mrs. Slewa, these documents outline the asset division. As you can see, given the current financial situation and the prenuptial agreement you signed, the settlement is quite straightforward." Straightforward. That was one word for it. Lupita scanned the pages through tears that blurred the ink into meaningless smears. She would walk away with nothing. Not the penthouse apartment she had decorated with her own hands, choosing every piece of furniture, every painting, turning an empty space into a home. Not the vacation house by the lake where she had imagined raising children someday. Not even the car she drove daily, apparently purchased under Curtis's name, despite her being the one who made the payments when money was tight. "Curtis, please." Her voice came out broken and small. She hated how weak she sounded. Hated that even now, watching him dismantle their life together like it meant nothing, part of her still hoped he would look at her with something resembling love. "We can work this out. Whatever problems we have, we can fix them. 10 years has to mean something." He laughed again, and the sound cut deeper than any knife. 10 years of you holding me back, you mean? 10 years of me pretending your small-town dreams were enough for a man with vision. Jennifer understands ambition, Lupita. She understands what it takes to build something real. Jennifer Kensington. The name had become a curse in Lupita's mind over the past months. At 60, the woman had more money than most people could dream of, inherited from family who had been wealthy for generations. And apparently she had Curtis's heart, if such an organ even existed in his chest. Howard Mitchells, the elderly lawyer sitting beside Lupita, had been silent through most of the proceedings. His weathered face showed nothing, but his hands rested on a black briefcase that seemed to pulse with hidden significance. Lupita barely noticed it. Her entire world had narrowed to Curtis's face, to the casual cruelty in his eyes, to the way he looked at her like she was something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "My client is being extraordinarily generous," Patricia continued, her voice crisp and professional. "He could have made this much more difficult, but he recognizes that you need to move on with your life. Some women your age manage to start over quite successfully." The words landed like a slap. Your age, as if being in her 30s meant she was used up, worthless, past her prime. Curtis had spent years telling her she was beautiful, had called her his queen in the early days of their marriage. Now she was just an inconvenience to be disposed of as quickly and cheaply as possible. "I gave you everything." Lupita's voice grew stronger, fueled by anger that was finally beginning to cut through the grief. "I left my family for you. My mother begged me not to marry you, and I chose you anyway. I walked away from everyone who loved me because you said they didn't understand us." Curtis's expression hardened. "Your mother was a bitter old woman who wanted to control your life. I set you free from that, and this is the thanks I get." She saw what you were. The words escaped before Lupita could stop them. "She knew you would do this. She told me on my wedding day that you would destroy me and throw away the pieces when you were done." Well, she was wrong about one thing. Curtis stood up, smoothing his tie with practiced ease. "I'm not throwing away pieces. I'm giving you a chance to build something on your own. You should be grateful." Grateful. The word echoed in Lupita's mind like a sick joke. She should be grateful that her husband was leaving her for someone else. Grateful that he was taking everything they had built together. Grateful that he was rewriting their entire history to paint himself as the hero and her as the burden. Howard Mitchell's finally moved, his chair scraping against the floor with deliberate slowness. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of decades spent in courtrooms fighting battles most people never knew existed. "Mr. Sliwa, before we proceed any further, there is something Mrs. Long needs to see." Curtis waved his hand dismissively. "More delays. Look, Howard, I respect that you're doing your job, but this is over. The papers are signed, the decision is made. Whatever last-minute theatrics you have planned won't change anything." The old lawyer's hands moved to the briefcase, his fingers working the combination lock with steady precision. "Lupita, your mother gave me this 10 years ago. She made me promise to open it only under 2 very specific circumstances." Lupita's heart stuttered. Her mother's name, spoken aloud in this room full of people who had never known her, felt like a ghost materializing in the corner. Estelle Long had died 6 months ago. Her funeral attended by Lupita alone because Curtis had claimed he was too busy with work to pay respects to a woman who had never liked him anyway. The first circumstance was if Estelle passed away. Howard's eyes met Lupita's, and she saw something there that looked like vindication mixed with sorrow. The second was if Curtis Sliwa betrayed you. The briefcase opened with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than Curtis's earlier laughter. Inside were documents, folders thick with papers, and sitting on top of everything was a letter in her mother's elegant handwriting. Curtis's face had gone from confident to cautious. "What is this?" Howard began removing documents, laying them across the table with the precision of a dealer, revealing a winning hand. "This, Mr. Sliwa, is the real story of your empire. The story your wife is only now learning, though she has been at the center of it all along." Patricia leaned forward, her professional mask slipping for the first time as she scanned the papers. Her face went pale. "What your mother did," Howard continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "was protect you in ways you never knew existed. While you were signing your life away to this man, she was building an empire in the shadows, using every resource at her disposal to make sure he could never truly destroy you." Lupita's hands shook as she reached for the letter on top. Her mother's handwriting blurred through fresh tears, but she could make out the opening lines that would change everything she thought she knew about her life. My precious daughter, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have come true. Curtis's laughter had died completely now, replaced by something that looked dangerously close to fear. And in that moment, Lupita Long began to understand that the conference room she had entered as a discarded wife was about to transform into the birthplace of something her husband had never anticipated. The beginning of his end and the dawn of her empire. Chapter 2. The empire built in shadows. Lupita's fingers trembled so violently that the paper in her hands rustled like dry leaves in a storm. Her mother's words swam before her eyes, each sentence a revelation that rewrote everything she thought she understood about the past decade of her life. The letter was 3 pages long, covered front and back in Estelle Long's careful script, the handwriting of a woman who had chosen each word with the precision of someone building a fortress, one brick at a time. Baby girl, I never stopped loving you, even when you wouldn't take my calls. Even when you sent back my letters unopened, even when you stood at your wedding and looked at me like I was the enemy trying to steal your happiness. I knew Curtis Sliwa was poison the moment I met him. I saw how he looked at you, not like a man seeing a woman he loves, but like a hunter spotting prey that doesn't know it's being stalked. The words cut through Lupita like a blade heated in fire. She remembered her wedding day with painful clarity now. How her mother had stood in the back of the church, with tears streaming down her face. How Estelle had whispered those terrible words when Lupita asked for her blessing. You marry that man, and you are dead to this family. Not because I hate you, but because watching him destroy you will kill me first. Lupita had chosen Curtis anyway, believing her mother was jealous, controlling, unable to accept that her daughter had found love and happiness. I couldn't stop you from marrying him, the letter continued. So I did the next best thing. I made sure he could never completely win, never fully own you, never reduce you to nothing, no matter how hard he tried. Every dollar your grandmother left me, every favor I had earned over a lifetime of helping people in our community, every connection I had made through blood and sweat and refusing to accept limits, I used it all to build something he would never see coming. Howard Mitchell's had begun spreading documents across the conference table, each one landing with the soft sound of thunder in the distance, the storm approaching but not yet upon them. Curtis had stopped pretending to be relaxed. He stood rigid near the window, his jaw clenched so tight that muscles jumped in his cheeks. Patricia was frantically typing on her laptop, her manicured nails clicking against the keys like a clock counting down to midnight. These are property deeds, Howard explained, his voice steady and relentless as ocean waves reshaping a coastline. The commercial building that houses your flagship office, Mr. Sliwa, the one you claim to have purchased through your first major deal, the acquisition that launched your reputation. It belongs to Mrs. Long. Her mother bought it 6 months before your supposed purchase, through a holding company buried so deep in paperwork that your lawyers never found the trail. Curtis's face had gone from tan to gray. That's impossible. I signed those papers myself. I negotiated that deal for months. You signed papers leasing the property from a company you never bothered to research. Howard pulled out another folder, this one even thicker. The vacation house by the lake, the one Mrs. Long was told she has no claim to. Also owned by a trust with her name on it, established by Estelle Long before you married her daughter. The car that supposedly belongs to you, registered to the same trust. Lupita couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was spinning, reality tilting on an axis she hadn't known existed. Her mother had spent a decade secretly building walls around her, and she had never known. All those years of silence between them, all those unanswered phone calls and returned letters, Estelle had been working in the shadows to protect a daughter who thought
she had been abandoned.
But that's just the beginning. Howard's eyes glinted with something that looked like satisfaction, earned through patience most people couldn't maintain. The supply chain software that made you wealthy, Mr. Sliwa, the innovation you took credit for in every interview, every magazine profile, every speech you gave about visionary thinking. The patents belonged to Mrs. Long. What? Curtis's voice cracked like thin ice under too much weight. Estelle Long purchased those patents from a struggling developer, registered them in her daughter's name through another series of intermediaries, then licensed them to your company through such a complex web that you never traced it back to the source. You have been paying royalties to your own wife for years, money that went into accounts she didn't know existed, building wealth you couldn't touch. Patricia had stopped typing. Her professional composure had cracked completely, revealing genuine shock underneath the expensive suit and perfect makeup. We need to verify this. These could be forgeries. Howard smiled without warmth. Every document has been authenticated by 3 separate legal firms. Every transaction has been verified through bank records and government filings. Estelle Long spent the last decade of her life building a financial fortress around her daughter, and she did it so well that even the people managing parts of the empire didn't know they were pieces of a larger puzzle. Lupita's hands found another document in the pile, this one showing a property she didn't recognize at first. Then her memory clicked into place. It was the building Curtis had mortgaged 2 years ago when money got tight. The loan, he had told her, was necessary to save everything they had built together. Except according to the papers in front of her, he had never owned the building to mortgage. He had borrowed money against property that belonged to her, money they were still paying back with interest that strangled their monthly budget. How much? Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. How much is there? Howard pulled out a leather portfolio, the kind important documents lived in when they were being presented to people who mattered. Inside was a financial analysis dated 3 months before her mother's death, showing columns of numbers and properties and investments that stretched across multiple pages. The empire your mother built is worth $450 million. The number hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Lupita heard it but couldn't process it, couldn't connect those words to her reality. She had spent the last year worried about making rent on a smaller apartment after the divorce, had calculated how she would survive on whatever job she could find with skills that had grown rusty from disuse. $450 million was a fantasy number, something that happened to other people, not to women sitting in divorce proceedings about to lose everything. That's insane, Curtis whispered, but his eyes were doing frantic calculations, his mind clearly racing through the implications. Lupita, this is incredible. This changes everything. We can forget all this divorce nonsense. We can work together. We can build something even bigger than what your mother imagined. The switch in his tone was so abrupt, it would have been funny if it wasn't so nakedly desperate. 5 minutes ago she had been dead weight and baggage. Now she was suddenly worth keeping. Mr. Sliwa, you should know that your personal holdings, once all debts are properly calculated against assets you actually own, rather than assets you thought you owned, total approximately $12 million. Howard's voice carried the satisfaction of a man delivering news he had waited years to share. And most of that $12 million is owed to creditors who believed your collateral was real. Patricia had recovered enough to attempt damage control. Even if these documents are authentic, the prenuptial agreement Mrs. Long signed would still apply to any assets acquired during the marriage, except these assets weren't acquired during the marriage. Howard tapped the papers with one weathered finger. They existed before the wedding, or they were inherited after the wedding, or they were purchased through entities that have nothing to do with the marriage itself. The prenuptial agreement is worth less than the paper it's printed on, because it divides assets that Mr. Sliwa never actually owned. Lupita's mind was slowly catching up to what this meant. Every time Curtis had brought her papers to sign over the years, claiming they were routine formalities necessary for the smooth operation of their life together. He had been trying to trick her into signing away property that was already hers. Every time he had made her feel stupid for not understanding complex financial matters. He'd been terrified she would ask the right questions and discover his entire empire was built on a foundation of her mother's money and planning. Jennifer needs to know about this. Curtis's voice had gone hollow. The confident man who had walked into this room, replaced by someone who could see his carefully constructed world collapsing in real time. This changes the deal we made. She was going to invest in my company, but if the company doesn't actually own what I said it owned, then everything falls apart. Jennifer Kensington. Howard spoke the name like he was identifying a specimen under a microscope. The 60-year-old heiress you left your wife for. The woman whose family money you desperately needed to cover debts that were coming due. Yes, I imagine she will be very interested to learn that the man she planned to marry is not quite the successful entrepreneur he presented himself to be. Curtis turned to Lupita, and for the first time since she had known him, his mask slipped completely away. Underneath the charm and confidence and practiced charisma was something small and frightened and mean. A man who had built his entire identity on taking what wasn't his and calling it achievement. Lupita, baby, please. We can fix this. I made mistakes, I know that, but we love each other. That has to count for something. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing a face she had kissed goodbye 1,000 mornings. The man she had loved had never existed. He was a story she had told herself, a character she had invented to explain away the cruelty and dismissiveness and systematic destruction of her confidence. And her mother had known. Estelle had seen through the performance from day one, and had loved her daughter enough to build escape routes, even while Lupita refused to speak to her. "You don't love me," Lupita heard herself say, and her voice was stronger now, fueled by something she hadn't felt in years. Certainty. "You never did. And whatever happens next, whatever becomes of this money or these properties or any of it, one thing is clear. You will never touch me again. You will never manipulate me again. You will never make me doubt my own worth again." Curtis opened his mouth to argue, to negotiate, to find some angle that would let him salvage something from the wreckage. But Howard was already gathering the documents, already preparing the next phase of the legal battle that Curtis had no idea he was about to lose. And somewhere beyond the grave, Estelle Long was finally getting her revenge. Chapter 3. The Man Who Never Was. The months after the briefcase revelation felt like living in a dream where all the familiar landmarks had been replaced with alien structures that looked almost right, but were fundamentally wrong. Lupita moved through hours that stretched and compressed without warning, her sense of time broken by the weight of secrets that had been hiding in plain sight for a decade. She had checked into a suite at a hotel downtown, unable to bear another night in the penthouse apartment where every piece of furniture was a lie, every photograph on the wall a scene from a play she hadn't known she was performing. Howard. Mitchell's had arranged everything with the efficiency of someone who'd been preparing for this moment since the day Lupita said her wedding vows. The hotel suite was paid for through accounts she had never known existed, cards that bore her name but drew on money her mother had set aside specifically for this transition. There were more letters from Estelle too, each one marked for different stages of the journey ahead. The one labeled "For When You Doubt Yourself" sat unopened on the nightstand, its envelope worn at the edges like her mother had handled it many times while writing, imagining the moment her daughter would need these words. Curtis had called 17 times on the second day alone. Lupita had watched her phone light up with his name, had listened to voicemails that cycled through every manipulation technique in his arsenal. The first few messages were angry, accusing her of conspiracy with her mother to trap him, threatening to expose this whole situation as fraud. Then came the pleading ones, his voice thick with tears that might have been real or might have been another performance, saying they could work through this together, reminding her of good times they had shared that felt more like hostage memories now. The last voicemails had been different, cold and calculated, hinting at information he could release to the media about her family, suggesting that perhaps she didn't want certain stories becoming public. Howard had gotten her a new phone number by the third day, along with security protocols that felt excessive until they weren't. A man had followed her to a coffee shop that afternoon, someone who looked too alert, too interested in her movements. When she mentioned it to the security team Howard had insisted on hiring, they had quietly intercepted the man and discovered he was a private investigator Curtis had hired to document her activities, looking for some weakness to exploit. "He's panicking," Howard had explained over dinner at a restaurant with a private room where they could talk without being overheard. Everything Curtis Slewer believed about himself was built on the foundation of wealth and success he thought he had earned. Now that foundation has been revealed as smoke and mirrors, and he's watching his entire identity dissolve. Desperate men do dangerous things. The old lawyer had spread new documents across the table, showing how quickly Curtis's world was unraveling. Jennifer Kensington's family lawyers had apparently advised her to slow down the engagement after conducting their own investigation into Curtis's finances. The media had started asking questions too, picking up whispers from unnamed sources within the industry who were suddenly willing to discuss irregularities in Curtis's business dealings. Properties Curtis had claimed as assets were revealed to be leases or loans against collateral he didn't own. Investors who had trusted him with their money were discovering that returns had been paid not from profits, but from new investments. A classic scheme that only works until someone asks the wrong questions. "Jennifer is furious," Howard said with something that might have been satisfaction in his eyes. She thought she was marrying a self-made success story, a man who built an empire through vision and hard work. Instead, she's discovering he was living off his wife's mother's money while pretending to be a genius. Lupita pushed food around her plate without eating. She should have felt victorious, should have been celebrating Curtis's downfall with champagne and laughter. Instead, she felt hollow, carved out by the realization that she had wasted 10 years loving a man who had never existed. All those nights she had held him while he talked about his dreams. All those mornings she had encouraged him through setbacks. All those decisions she had made to support his ambitions at the cost of her own. They had been investments in a lie. "Your mother anticipated this too," Howard said gently, reaching into his briefcase for another envelope. "She knew you would grieve not just the marriage ending, but the years you gave to something that turned out to be nothing. She wanted you to know something important." The envelope had Estelle's handwriting on the outside, "For when you think you wasted your life." Inside was a single page, shorter than the other letters, but somehow heavier. "Lupita, my heart, you are not foolish for loving deeply. You are not weak for trusting completely. You are not a failure for believing the best in someone who only showed you carefully constructed lies. The ability to give your whole self to another person is not a flaw to be corrected, but a strength to be protected. Curtis Slewer is the one who failed. He had a woman who would have moved mountains for him, and he threw that away for money and ego and shallow praise from people who don't matter. Your capacity for loyalty and dedication and fierce love is not diminished by his unworthiness to receive it. When the right person comes along, someone who deserves the gift of your heart, you will know the difference. And this time, my baby, you will choose with open eyes." Tears blurred the words until Lupita had to set the letter down. Her mother had understood everything, had seen all of this coming with the clarity of someone who had lived long enough to recognize predators, no matter how convincing their camouflage. "There's something else you need to know," Howard said, his voice careful now. Curtis has been trying to secure emergency loans using properties as collateral, but the banks have started asking for proof of ownership. When they discover he doesn't actually own what he claims to own, there could be criminal charges. Fraud, forgery, possibly more depending on what investigators find. I don't want him in prison. The words surprised Lupita, even as she spoke them. She wanted Curtis to face consequences, wanted him to understand the pain he had caused, but she didn't want his destruction. She just wanted him out of her life. That may not be your choice to make, Howard said quietly. Once banks and investors discover they've been defrauded, they will pursue this regardless of your wishes. Your mother built protections around you, but she also built weapons that are now being aimed at Curtis, whether you pull the trigger or not. The realization sat heavy in Lupita's stomach. Her mother's love had been protective but also ruthless, designed to destroy anyone who threatened her daughter. Estelle Long had played a long game with patience that spanned years, and Curtis had walked into every trap while thinking he was the one in control. That night, alone in the hotel suite, with city lights creating shadows that danced across unfamiliar walls, Lupita pulled out photo albums she had brought from the penthouse. She went through them methodically, looking at her younger self in wedding photos, anniversary celebrations, charity galas, where she stood beside Curtis with a smile that looked genuine, because she had believed her own happiness was real. In almost every photo, she was looking at Curtis with adoration, while he looked at the camera, at other guests, at his phone, at anything but her. The evidence of his indifference had been there all along, but she had trained herself not to see it, had explained away every distance and dismissal as stress or distraction or the demands of building a future together. There was one photo that hurt more than the others, their 5th anniversary party, a celebration Curtis had organized to impress potential investors as much as to mark their marriage milestone. Lupita was wearing a dress she had bought specifically because Curtis mentioned he liked that style. Her hair styled the way he preferred. Her makeup carefully applied to meet standards he had casually suggested were important for the wife of a successful man. In the picture, she was gazing at him with love that radiated like sunlight while he checked his phone with an expression of irritation, his body angled away from her even as her hand rested on his arm. She had made excuses for him that night when he disappeared for 2 hours, had smoothed things over with confused guests who wondered where the host had gone. He had told her it was an emergency call from an investor, something that couldn't wait, and she had believed him because believing was easier than questioning. Now she wondered if he had been with Jennifer even then, if the affair had stretched back further than anyone knew, if there had been others before Jennifer that she had been too trusting to notice. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, panic flared, thinking Curtis had found her new contact information. But it was Howard, sending her details about the team her mother had assembled to manage the properties and investments. There were names and credentials, specialists in different areas who had been maintaining Estelle's empire while Lupita lived in ignorance. One name caught her attention, Diane Rothford, listed as the primary property advisor and noted as Estelle's closest friend. There was a number below the name and a note from Howard. Your mother trusted her with everything. She wants to meet you whenever you're ready. Lupita sat with the phone in her hand, staring at that name, realizing there was a whole network of people who had known her mother better than she had in recent years. People who had helped build the fortress that was now protecting her from the ruins of her marriage. People who had been part of Estelle's life while Lupita was too busy trying to make Curtis love her to notice her mother dying slowly, grieving the loss of her daughter even before illness took her body. The regret was almost unbearable. All those years of silence, all those returned letters and missed calls, all those moments when she could have been building bridges instead of burning them. And her mother had loved her through all of it, had never stopped protecting her, even when Lupita wanted nothing to do with her. Sleep came in fragments that night. broken by dreams where she was trying to reach her mother, but kept getting lost in buildings with endless hallways. Each door she opened, revealing Curtis laughing while signing papers, over and over in an infinite loop. She woke at dawn with tears on her face, and a certainty settling into her bones, like concrete hardening into foundation. Curtis Sliwer had taken 10 years of her life, but he hadn't taken everything. Her mother had made sure of that, and whatever came next, whatever this empire in the shadows turned out to mean, Lupita was going to honor Estelle's sacrifice by refusing to let Curtis's betrayal define the rest of her story. She picked up her phone and texted the number Howard had sent. "Diane, this is Lupita. I'm ready to learn everything my mother wanted me to know." The response came within minutes. "I've been waiting for this message since the day you were born. Let me buy you breakfast and tell you about the woman who loved you more than life itself." And for the first time since the briefcase opened, Lupita felt something other than grief and anger. She felt the faint stirrings of hope. Chapter 4. The Queen Who Didn't Know She Wore a Crown. Diane Rothford was not what Lupita expected. She had imagined someone formal and distant, a business professional in severe suits who spoke in corporate language about properties and portfolios. Instead, the woman who swept into the restaurant with the confidence of someone who owned not just the building, but the entire block, was wearing flowing clothes in sunset colors. Her silver hair styled in elaborate braids that framed a face lined with decades of laughter and determination. She was in her 60s and moved like someone half that age, energy radiating from her in waves that made other diners turn to look without quite knowing why. Lupita Long. Diane's voice was warm and strong, the kind of voice that could comfort a child or command a boardroom with equal effectiveness. She didn't offer a handshake or a formal greeting. Instead, she pulled Lupita into a hug that smelled like vanilla and something else, some perfume that sparked a memory Lupita couldn't quite place. "You look just like your mother. Same eyes, same spirit trying to hide behind walls that won't protect you anymore." They sat at a corner table where morning sun poured through windows that overlooked the city, waking up to another day. Diane ordered with the casual authority of someone who had been here 1,000 times, requesting specific dishes by name and adding modifications the server wrote down without question. When the coffee arrived, dark and strong and bitter in a way that required sugar to be bearable, Diane wrapped her hands around her cup and looked at Lupita with eyes that saw too much. "Your mother was my best friend for over 30 years, she began without preamble, without the small talk that usually cushioned difficult conversations. "We met when we were both young and angry, and determined to prove the world wrong about what women like us could accomplish. Estelle was fierce even then, smart in ways that made men uncomfortable, unwilling to accept limits just because someone in authority said that's how things were done." Lupita wrapped her own hands around her coffee cup, feeling the heat seep into her palms. She never talked about her past much. By the time I was old enough to ask real questions, she was always busy with work, always managing some crisis or meeting with people I didn't know. And then I got married and stopped asking anything at all. "Curtis Sliwer convinced you that your mother was the enemy," Diane said, "and it wasn't a question. He isolated you systematically, the way predators always do, made you believe that anyone who questioned him was trying to control you, trying to steal your happiness. Estelle saw it happening and it killed her inside, watching her baby girl drift away, while that man wrapped chains around you and called them love." The words stung because they were true. Lupita could remember exactly how Curtis had planted seeds of doubt about her mother's intentions, how he had interpreted every piece of advice as attempted manipulation, how he had gradually made it easier to avoid Estelle than to deal with his reactions to their contact. It had been slow, subtle, a drowning where the water rose so gradually you didn't realize you couldn't breathe until you were already underwater. She could have stopped the wedding, Lupita said, and the old anger surged up before she could contain it. If she was really that concerned, she could have done something. Told me what she suspected about Curtis, showed me evidence. Anything other than just issuing ultimatums that pushed me away. Diane took a long sip of coffee before responding, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Your mother tried that at first. Brought you evidence that Curtis was courting you while simultaneously pursuing 3 other women from families with money. Showed you documents proving his previous business had failed because of questionable practices that bordered on fraud. You told her she was making it up because she couldn't accept that you were an adult making your own choices. The memory surfaced like something floating up from deep water, bloated and ugly with age. Lupita had dismissed everything her mother showed her, convinced it was lies manufactured to sabotage her relationship. Curtis had been so convincing when he explained away every inconsistency, had made her feel foolish for doubting him, had positioned himself as the victim of her mother's prejudice and interference. So Estelle made a choice. Diane continued, her eyes never leaving Lupita's face. She could keep fighting and lose you forever. Could watch you marry Curtis while hating her for trying to prevent it. Or she could let you learn the hard way while building protections that would keep him from destroying you completely. She chose love over control, even though it meant swallowing her own fear and watching you walk into danger with open eyes. She let me marry a monster. Lupita's voice broke on the words. She let you grow up, Diane corrected gently. She let you make your own mistakes while ensuring those mistakes wouldn't be fatal. That's what love looks like when you're dealing with an adult child who has stopped listening. You build scaffolding around them so when they fall, they don't hit the ground hard enough to break. Food arrived, plates of breakfast that looked too beautiful to eat. But Diane immediately started serving portions onto Lupita's plate with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who had raised children or cared for people who forgot to care for themselves. Eat. You can't rebuild an empire on coffee and grief. An empire. Lupita picked up her fork but couldn't bring herself to take a bite yet. I still can't wrap my mind around that. $450 million. My mother was never wealthy, not when I was growing up. We lived comfortably but not extravagantly. Where did all of this come from? Diane smiled, and for a moment Lupita caught a glimpse of the younger woman she must have been, someone capable of matching Estelle Long's determination and vision. Your grandmother left your mother a substantial inheritance, about $2 million when she passed. Most people would have invested it safely, lived off the returns, maybe bought a nice house and secured their retirement. Estelle took that money and turned it into a fortune by being smarter and more patient than everyone else in the room. She began explaining in detail that made the abstract numbers feel concrete. Estelle had started by purchasing commercial properties in neighborhoods most investors overlooked, areas that were struggling but showed signs of potential transformation. She bought buildings at auction for fractions of their value, held them through years when people said she was throwing money away, then sold them when development finally arrived and multiplied her investment 10 times over. She had taken those profits and invested in technology patents from inventors who were brilliant but terrible at business, people who would sell their innovations for immediate cash without understanding the long-term value. Some of those patents became worth millions as industries adopted the technologies. She was ruthless when she needed to be, Diane said, pride evident in her voice. But she was also generous in ways most people never saw. She would mentor young entrepreneurs, especially women and people who looked like her, people who couldn't get meetings with traditional investors because their faces didn't fit the expected mold. She would invest in their businesses, not for maximum profit, but to create a network of people who owed her their success. People who would help her when she needed help moving money, or hiding transactions, or building the fortress that would protect you. Lupita finally took a bite of food, the taste barely registering through the emotions churning in her stomach. She did all of this for me. Every single move she made for the last decade was about protecting you from Curtis Sliwa, Diane confirmed. She watched him court you and saw a con artist running the most important con of his life. She investigated his background, discovered he came from money that his family lost through gambling and poor investments, learned that he had been building his reputation on borrowed money and exaggerated accomplishments. He needed you, needed a connection to your mother's wealth and community standing, needed the legitimacy that came from marrying into a respected family. But he never got access to any of it, Lupita said slowly, pieces clicking into place, because she never gave him the chance. The first property she bought after you got engaged was the commercial building Curtis claimed to acquire 6 months into your marriage, Diane explained. She purchased it anonymously through a shell company, then created an elaborate paper trail that made it look like Curtis had bought it through his own business acumen. He thought he was succeeding on his own merit, thought he was building an empire through vision and hard work. In reality, he was a puppet dancing on strings your mother controlled, allowed to feel successful because Estelle knew that keeping him confident and distracted was the best way to keep him from hurting you too badly. The revelation was dizzying. Every triumph Curtis had celebrated, every deal he had closed, every moment when he had preened in front of mirrors or accepted congratulations from peers, it had all been a performance Estelle choreographed from behind a curtain he never knew existed. She bought the patents to his supply chain software, licensed them to him through intermediaries so complex he never traced the ownership, and watched him make millions that were ultimately paid to accounts in your name, Diane continued. She purchased properties he wanted, let him lease them while believing he owned them, created an entire financial structure that looked like his empire, but was actually hers. Or rather yours. Why didn't she just tell me? The question burst out of Lupita like water breaking through a dam. Why all the secrecy and complexity? Why not just sit me down and explain what Curtis was and show me proof I couldn't deny? Diane's expression softened with compassion that was almost harder to bear than judgment would have been. She tried, sweetheart. In those first months after you got engaged, she tried everything she could think of to make you see the truth. But Curtis had already gotten inside your head, had already made you doubt your own instincts and your mother's intentions. Every time Estelle presented evidence, you went to Curtis, and he explained it away with lies that sounded more believable than truth, because you wanted to believe him. You wanted the fairy tale of being swept off your feet by a charming man who loved you for yourself, not for what you could provide. And Curtis was very good at playing that role. Lupita felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Not here in a public restaurant where other diners were enjoying their breakfast without their entire understanding of reality being dismantled over eggs and coffee. So your mother changed tactics, Diane said. She let you have your fairy tale while ensuring that when it inevitably shattered, you would have power waiting. She built an empire in secret, used her network to hide every transaction and investment, and she made me promise that when the time came, I would help you understand what she had done and why. She died 6 months ago, Lupita whispered. I didn't even know she was sick until the hospital called to say she was gone. Curtis told me he would handle the funeral arrangements. Then he didn't. I went alone to her service, buried my mother without him there, and the whole time I felt guilty because I had been a terrible daughter who abandoned her when she needed me most. Estelle never stopped loving you, Diane said firmly. Not for 1 second of one day in all those years of silence. She understood that Curtis had poisoned your relationship with her, and she was waiting for you to find your way back. When she got sick, really sick in those final months, she made peace with dying without reconciliation because she knew the briefcase would do what she couldn't do in life. She knew that eventually Curtis would betray you badly enough that you would need the resources she had built, and she trusted that when that moment came, you would finally understand everything she had tried to tell you when you wouldn't listen. The tears came then, unstoppable and gut-wrenching. The grief of losing her mother, tangled with the agony of realizing she had wasted precious time being stubborn and blind. Diane moved around the table to put her arms around Lupita, holding her while she sobbed in a restaurant that pretended not to notice, giving her the physical comfort of maternal presence that Lupita had rejected from Estelle for far too long. When the storm of tears finally subsided, Diane handed her napkins and waited while she cleaned her face. Her makeup surely ruined, but beyond caring. "Now," Diane said when Lupita could breathe again, "we need to talk about what comes next. You inherited more than money and properties. You inherited responsibility. Your mother built this empire to protect you, but she also built it to do good in the world, to help people who needed help the way she had needed help when she was young. You get to decide what this wealth becomes. You can maintain it as a fortress around yourself, or you can use it to build something that honors your mother's memory and helps women in situations like the one you just escaped." But even as Diane spoke with confidence, Lupita felt paralysis creeping over her. "I don't know how to do any of this," she admitted, her voice small. "I don't understand how to manage money or properties or make the kinds of decisions people will expect from me. Curtis spent years telling me I wasn't smart enough to handle complex matters. What if he was right? What if I make terrible mistakes and lose everything my mother built?" Diane's expression shifted to something gentler. "Nobody expects you to become an expert overnight, sweetheart. That's why your mother assembled a team of people who understand different pieces of the puzzle. My job, Howard's job, everyone else she brought together, we're here to guide you while you learn. You don't have to make decisions alone. You just have to be willing to listen, ask questions, and trust that your instincts are stronger than Curtis taught you to believe." "What if my instincts are broken?" Lupita asked, and the fear in her voice was raw. "What if 10 years with Curtis damaged something in me that can't be fixed?" "Then we'll work on healing what's broken," Diane said simply. "Your mother didn't expect perfection. She expected you to try, to care, to use what she gave you with intention and heart. The rest is just learning as you go, making mistakes and fixing them, growing into the role she knew you could fill, even if you don't believe it yet." Lupita looked at this woman who had been her mother's friend, who had kept secrets and built empires, and waited patiently for the moment she could finally tell the truth. "Show me," she said hesitantly. "Show me everything she planned. But please understand that I'm going to need a lot of help figuring out what to do with it. I'm not confident or capable yet. I'm just willing to try." And Diane Rothford, keeper of secrets and builder of empires, began laying out the blueprints for a future Estelle Long had imagined but wouldn't live to see, trusting her daughter to make it real, even if the path there would be messy and uncertain and full of stumbling steps towards something beautiful. Chapter 5. The Woman She Was Becoming. Lupita stood in what had once been a factory floor, her footsteps echoing through cavernous space where machines had hummed and workers had built airplane parts during a war that ended before she was born. Sunlight poured through windows 3 stories tall, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars, and she could see the bones of what this building could become if someone loved it enough to bring it back to life. Diane had brought her here as part of what she called the Grand Tour, showing Lupita properties her mother owned that sat waiting for purpose and vision. "This was the Riverside Manufacturing Building," Diane explained, her voice bouncing off concrete and steel. "Your mother bought it for almost nothing from the city, which was desperate to get it off their books before it became a liability. Everyone said she was crazy to purchase a ruin like this, that it would cost more to restore than it was worth, that she should demolish it and sell the land to developers who would build luxury apartments. But Estelle looked at this space and saw potential." Lupita walked slowly through the vast room, her fingers trailing along brick walls that had held up for more than 80 years, imagining the stories these walls could tell if buildings could speak. She thought about the people who had worked here, probably many of them women like her grandmother, people who came to factories during wartime when the nation needed their labor, who proved they could do work men said was impossible, who built the foundation for a future they might not live to see. She wanted to turn it into a community center, Diane continued, pulling out a folder that contained sketches and notes in Estelle's handwriting. A place specifically for women who are rebuilding their lives after divorce or leaving difficult situations. She envisioned job training programs in technology and skilled trades, legal clinics for women navigating divorce and custody battles, mental health counseling and support groups, childcare for parents attending programs, and a business incubator for women entrepreneurs starting their own companies. The vision took shape in Lupita's mind like a photograph developing in solution. She could see this space transformed, could imagine walls built to create classrooms and offices, could picture women walking through these doors, carrying the weight of their pasts, but finding tools here to build different futures. It was exactly the kind of place she wished had existed when she was drowning in Curtis's manipulation, when she thought she had nowhere to turn because admitting failure felt worse than staying miserable. "I want to do this," Lupita heard herself say, the words coming from someplace deeper than rational thought. "I want to make this real, not just because my mother planned it, but because I need it to exist in the world. I need to know that other women won't have to go through what I went through without having somewhere to turn." But even as she spoke the words, doubt crept in like fog. "I don't know where to start, though. I don't know how to run a community center or design programs or hire staff. What if I mess this up? What if I waste my mother's money on something that doesn't work?" Diane smiled with satisfaction that suggested she had been waiting for exactly this mixture of passion and uncertainty. "Then we have a lot of work ahead of us, and we'll do it together. Your mother left detailed plans, but she knew you would need to make them your own, add your own vision and experience. She wasn't trying to control how you use the empire she built. She was giving you tools and trusting you to figure out what to build with them, one step at a time." Over the following months, Lupita threw herself into the project with an intensity that surprised everyone, including herself. Though progress was slower and messier than she had hoped, she met with architects who specialized in adaptive reuse, people who understood how to honor a building's history while transforming it for modern purposes, but found herself overwhelmed by technical jargon and decisions she didn't feel qualified to make. She interviewed potential staff members for the center, women who had their own stories of surviving and rebuilding, who brought expertise in everything from career counseling to legal advocacy to trauma therapy, but second-guessed every hiring decision, terrified of choosing the wrong people. She reviewed her mother's financial plans with accountants and lawyers, sitting through meeting after meeting where they explained balance sheets and cash flow projections, and all the technical details Curtis had insisted were too complicated for her to grasp. Sometimes the information clicked and made sense. Other times she felt like she was drowning in numbers that refused to arrange themselves into patterns she could understand. Howard Mitchell's watched this transformation with the quiet approval of someone seeing a seed he had planted finally breaking through soil into sunlight. Though he also saw the struggle. Your mother would be proud," he told Lupita one afternoon in his office, where they were finalizing the legal structure that would allow the community center to operate as a non-profit funded by Estelle's estate. "She always said you had more strength than you knew, that Curtis had buried your confidence under years of being told you weren't smart enough or capable enough. She was waiting for you to remember who you really were." "I'm not sure I ever knew who I really was," Lupita admitted. "I went from being my mother's daughter to being Curtis's wife, without spending much time figuring out who Lupita Long was, independent of those relationships. Now I'm discovering that the person I am might be someone I actually like, but I'm also discovering that I don't have all the answers. I make mistakes constantly. I change my mind about decisions. I wake up at night panicking about whether I'm doing any of this right. That's called being human, Howard said gently. And it's also called learning. Nobody becomes an expert overnight, no matter how much money they inherit or how detailed the instructions their mother left behind. The legal proceedings with Curtis were moving forward with the inexorable momentum of avalanches, everything tumbling toward an inevitable conclusion he still seemed unable to fully accept. His lawyers, what remained of them after Patricia quit in disgust, were trying desperately to negotiate some kind of settlement that would let Curtis walk away with something. But Howard was unmoved. Curtis would get exactly what he deserved, which was responsibility for debts he had actually accumulated, and nothing more. Jennifer. Kensington had formally ended their engagement through a press release that managed to be both diplomatic and devastating, expressing her deep disappointment in discovering that the man she had planned to marry was not who he claimed to be. The society pages, which had fawned over their romance just months earlier, now ran stories about how Jennifer had narrowly avoided a disastrous marriage to a con artist. Some publications even praised her for her due diligence in investigating her fiancé's background before fully committing, though Lupita suspected the real story was that Jennifer's family lawyers had done the investigation after concerns were raised. Curtis had tried to see Lupita several times, showing up at places he thought she might be, though her security team had gotten better at anticipating and preventing these ambush meetings. Once he had waited outside the hotel for hours, his appearance deteriorating in ways that made him look like a stranger wearing Curtis Sleewer's face. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by clothes that still tried to project success, but missed the mark in ways that made the attempt sadder than wearing something obviously cheap. When security escorted him away, he had shouted her name with desperation that echoed down city streets, and people turned to watch the scene with the morbid curiosity reserved for public breakdowns. Lupita had felt something approaching pity in that moment, seeing the man who had destroyed her own life now experiencing his own destruction. But the pity was complicated by anger that wouldn't fully fade, by the knowledge that Curtis's suffering was self-inflicted, while hers had been deliberately caused by his choices. She hadn't asked for this war, hadn't wanted revenge. She had only wanted to be loved authentically and treated with basic respect, and Curtis had proven himself incapable of providing either. Through all of this upheaval, Lupita found herself thinking about her mother more than she had in years. Not the Estelle of those painful final years, when silence had grown between them like a wall neither knew how to scale, but the mother of her childhood, the woman who had taught her to stand up straight and speak clearly, who had told her that being afraid was acceptable, but letting fear make decisions was not, who had lived with such fierce determination that the world bent around her rather than the other way around. She pulled out old photograph albums one evening, pictures from before Curtis, and was startled by the difference in her own face. The Lupita who smiled in these images looked confident, animated, present in a way the recent photos showed she hadn't been in years. Somewhere along the way, she had disappeared into the role of Curtis's wife, had become a supporting character in someone else's story instead of the protagonist of her own. Never again, she whispered to the empty hotel room, making a promise to herself and to her mother's memory. I will never make myself small for someone else's comfort again. Her phone buzzed with a message from Diane. Tomorrow morning I want you to meet someone, a contractor who specializes in historic restoration. He's the best at what he does, and he might be perfect for the Riverside project. Also, he's single and his daughter is brilliant. No pressure, just mentioning it. Lupita smiled despite herself. Diane had been gently pushing her toward the idea that moving on from Curtis didn't mean being alone forever, that the right person would be someone who enhanced her life rather than consuming it. She had resisted the suggestion, feeling like it was too soon, like she needed to fully heal before considering any kind of romantic connection. But then she thought about her mother's letter, the one that said the right person would be out there when she was ready, someone who would see her as the queen she had always been. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to meet a contractor with a brilliant daughter. Maybe expanding her professional network was exactly what the project needed. Maybe Diane was right, that walls built too thick could protect but also imprison. And learning to trust again was part of healing rather than something that happened after healing was complete. She texted back, "What time? And stop matchmaking, you're subtle as a train wreck." Diane's response came immediately. "Subtlety is overrated. Meet us at the Riverside building at 9. Wear something that shows you're a woman with power, not a victim waiting for rescue." Lupita looked at her reflection in the mirror, really looked at herself for the first time in longer than she could remember. The woman looking back wasn't the broken wife who had walked into that conference room expecting to lose everything. She was someone stronger, someone who carried scars but wasn't defined by them. Someone learning that power came from within rather than being bestowed by someone else's approval. Tomorrow she would meet a contractor. Next month the Riverside building would begin its transformation. In 6 months or a year, women would walk through its doors, looking for hope and finding resources that might change their lives. And all of it would be built on the foundation of a mother's love that transcended death and distance, and the daughter's stubborn refusal to listen until truth became impossible to ignore. Estelle Long might be gone, but her empire was just beginning to reveal its true purpose. And Lupita was ready to become the queen her mother had always known she could be, even if the journey there would take time and patience and more stumbling than she had ever imagined. Chapter 6. The Man Who Saw Her Truth. The rain started while Lupita was halfway to the Riverside building, sudden and torrential in the way only summer storms could be, turning streets into rivers and sending people scrambling for shelter. Her driver pulled up to the entrance, but the building's front door was locked, and she made a split-second decision to run through the deluge rather than wait. By the time she found shelter in a small gallery next door, she was soaked through. Her carefully chosen outfit that was supposed to project power and confidence now clinging uncomfortably and dripping puddles onto hardwood floors. "The rain gets you every time in this city," her voice said behind her, warm and slightly amused. "You think you can outsmart it, plan around it, check weather reports and carry umbrellas, and then boom, it finds a way to drench you anyway." Lupita turned to find a man watching her with eyes that smiled even when his mouth was still, the kind of person whose presence felt comfortable rather than intrusive. He was tall and solid, in the way of someone whose body was a tool for real work, rather than a sculpture maintained at expensive fitness facilities. His clothes were casual, jeans and a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Hands that showed calluses and scars that came from building things rather than pushing papers. "I feel like a drowned cat," Lupita admitted, trying to wring water from her jacket without much success. "Not exactly the professional impression I was aiming for this morning." "You're meeting someone." He moved to a small coat rack near the entrance and grabbed a towel that apparently lived there for exactly this kind of emergency. "Here, this will help a little. The gallery keeps supplies for weather refugees." She accepted the towel gratefully, patting her face and hair while trying to salvage some dignity. "I was supposed to meet a contractor at the Riverside building next door, but I'm early and everything's locked, and then the sky decided to open up like someone turned on a celestial faucet." "The Riverside Restoration Project?" His interest sharpened in a way that suggested more than casual curiosity. "I'm actually heading there myself. I'm the contractor." Tyson Fox. Of course he was. Lupita felt her face flush with embarrassment that had nothing to do with the rain. "I'm Lupita Long. I own the building, apparently, though I only found out about it recently. This is not how I plan to make a first impression." "First impressions are overrated," Tyson said easily, his smile widening into something that felt genuine rather than polished. I've started plenty of projects drenched in rain or covered in dust or looking like I lost a fight with a paint mixer. What matters is whether you care about the work and whether you're willing to listen to what the building needs, instead of just imposing your vision on it. They stood in the gallery entrance while rain hammered the windows, and Lupita found herself looking at the artwork displayed throughout the space. It was a photography exhibition, black and white images of industrial buildings in various states of decay and transformation. One particular piece caught her attention. A shot of sunlight streaming through broken windows onto a factory floor littered with the debris of forgotten work. "That's the Riverside building," Tyson said, noticing where her gaze had landed. "Before your mother bought it." The photographer captured something about the way light and shadow work in that space. How even abandoned and broken, it still has dignity and purpose waiting to be remembered. They stood together, looking at the photograph, and Lupita felt something shift in how she saw the project ahead. This wasn't just about creating a community center, wasn't just about fulfilling her mother's vision or honoring Estelle's memory. It was about taking something broken and finding beauty in it, about respecting what had been while building something new. "Tell me about your grandfather," she said, remembering the caption that mentioned he had worked in the building for decades. Tyson's expression softened with memory and loss. He was part of the generation that built this city's industrial backbone, worked in that factory for 38 years, started when he was barely out of school, and stayed until they closed the doors. He used to tell me stories about the war years, how everyone felt like what they were doing mattered because they were supporting soldiers overseas, building parts that would go into planes that would defend freedom. Then the war ended, and they shifted to making other things, but it was never quite the same. The sense of collective purpose disappeared, and it became just a job. Just hours traded for paychecks until there weren't enough paychecks to justify keeping the place open. What did he do after they closed? Lupita found herself genuinely interested, wanting to hear the story this stranger was sharing with her, while rain created a curtain between them and the rest of the world. He tried to retire, but he wasn't built for sitting still. Ended up teaching shop classes at a community center, showing kids how to work with their hands, how to take pride in building something real. He said the thing he missed most wasn't the paycheck, but the feeling of coming home tired because you had accomplished something tangible. You could point to a piece of metal or a finished product and say, "I made that exist in the world." That's what I try to bring to restoration work. That same sense of purpose and pride in craft. They talked for over an hour while the storm raged outside, and Lupita discovered that conversation with Tyson Fox felt effortless in a way she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. He asked her questions about the community center vision, and when she explained the programs her mother had planned, he offered suggestions from a practical perspective without dismissing or talking over her ideas. He told her about his daughter Simone, who was passionate about marine biology and currently obsessed with studying octopus intelligence. And the way his face lit up when he talked about her made something in Lupita's chest ache with recognition of what real love looked like. "Her mother and I divorced a few years ago," Tyson said, his tone careful but not defensive. "We got married young, had Simone right away, and didn't realize until it was too late that we wanted completely different things from life. She wanted the status and lifestyle that came with a successful business, wanted to be married to someone whose money could open certain doors. I wanted to do work that mattered, wanted to restore buildings that had history and character, wanted to raise my daughter to value substance over surface. We tried to make it work longer than we should have for Simone's sake, but eventually we had to admit that staying together was hurting her more than divorcing would." "Do you ever regret it?" Lupita asked, and she was asking about more than just his divorce. Was asking about all the choices people make that reshape their lives in ways they can't predict or control. Tyson considered the question seriously before answering. "I regret the pain it caused Simone, The confusion of watching her parents' marriage fall apart when she was old enough to understand something was wrong, but too young to really process what was happening. But I don't regret choosing honesty over comfortable lies. I don't regret refusing to keep pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. And I definitely don't regret having Simone in my life, even if her mother and I couldn't make our relationship work. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and through the gallery windows, Lupita could see Diane Rothford standing under the awning of the Riverside building, checking her phone and looking around with the air of someone wondering where her appointment had gone. She should go, should hurry over there and start the official meeting she was supposed to have. But part of her wanted to stay in this gallery, in this unexpected conversation with a man who made her feel seen in ways Curtis never had. I should get over there before Diane sends out a search party, she said reluctantly. Want to make a run for it together? Tyson offered. I'm already wet, and misery loves company. Or so they say. They ran through the drizzle, laughing like children escaping school. And Diane's expression, when she saw them arrive together, was knowing in ways that made Lupita want to protest that nothing had happened. They had just taken shelter from the rain in the same place. But the protest died unspoken, because maybe something had happened. Something subtle and significant that couldn't be explained or defended, just acknowledged as the beginning of possibility. The tour of the Riverside building took hours. Tyson walking them through what could be saved and what would need to be rebuilt, pointing out structural issues that needed addressing and architectural features worth preserving. He talked about the building with affection and respect, like it was a living thing with its own personality and dignity. And Lupita found herself imagining this space not just as it would be, but as it had been, full of workers and noise and the hum of productivity that built a nation. When the tour concluded and Diane made excuses to leave early that felt transparent but appreciated, Lupita and Tyson stood on the factory floor where sunlight poured through those massive windows. And he asked her a question that had nothing to do with construction or timelines or budgets. Would you want to grab coffee sometime? Not as contractor and client, just as two people who might enjoy continuing the conversation we started. Lupita's first instinct was to say no, to explain that she was barely divorced, that she was dealing with complicated legal issues and discovering she owned an empire she never knew existed, that she wasn't in any position to start something new when she was still processing the end of something old. But then she looked at Tyson Fox, really looked at him, and saw someone who wasn't trying to take anything from her, wasn't performing charm to manipulate her into providing what he needed, was just genuinely interested in knowing her better. Coffee sounds perfect, she heard herself say, and the smile that spread across his face was worth the risk of opening a door she had thought was locked forever. As she watched him walk away toward his truck, Diane appeared beside her like a magician materializing from thin air. That went well. You're completely unsubtle, and I should fire you, Lupita said without heat. You won't fire me because I'm right, and you know it. That man looked at you like you were the most interesting person in the room. And you looked at him like maybe you remembered what it feels like to be seen as a whole person, instead of a resource to be extracted. Diane's voice was gentle but firm. Your mother wanted you to be happy, Lupita. Not just safe, not just wealthy, but genuinely happy with someone who deserves what you have to give. I'm not saying Tyson Fox is that person, but I am saying you won't know unless you're willing to find out. Lupita didn't argue, because arguing would require admitting that Diane was wrong, and everything about the past few hours suggested she was absolutely right. So instead, she looked around the building that would become a place of transformation and healing. And she let herself imagine a future that included not just professional success and honoring her mother's legacy, but also the terrifying, beautiful possibility of learning to trust someone new with pieces of herself that Curtis had taught her to guard like weapons. Tomorrow, she would focus on business. Today, she would let herself feel hope. Chapter 7. The Serpent Strikes Back. Curtis Slewa sat in his cramped studio apartment, staring at a laptop screen that showed bank accounts drained to almost nothing, credit cards maxed out, and collection notices piling up like gravestones in a cemetery of his former life. The walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing. The furniture was cheap and uncomfortable. The whole space reeked of failure in ways that made his skin crawl every moment he spent here. This was not how his story was supposed to end. He was Curtis Slewa, the man who had built an empire from nothing, who had been profiled in business magazines and invited to speak at conferences, who had convinced a pharmaceutical heiress to fall in love with him and nearly secured enough money to save everything he had worked for. Now he was just another divorced, middle-aged man living in conditions he wouldn't have wished on his worst enemies, working for people who used to beg for his time and attention. Jennifer Kensington had stopped returning his calls after her lawyers finished explaining exactly how thoroughly he had lied about his financial situation. The engagement announcement that had felt like salvation just months ago now read like a cruel joke in the society pages, and people who had congratulated him on his upcoming marriage now avoided him at the few industry events he could still afford to attend. His former business partners were suing him for fraud, claiming he had misrepresented his ownership of assets and technologies, demanding millions in damages he had no way to pay. The banks that had extended him credit based on properties he claimed to own were threatening criminal charges if he didn't immediately produce deeds he couldn't forge or procure. Everything was Lupita's fault. That's how Curtis had come to see it, how he explained his downfall to himself in the dark hours before dawn when sleep wouldn't come and shame kept him company instead. If she had just accepted the divorce quietly, if she had walked away with nothing like he planned, if her dead mother hadn't interfered from beyond the grave with that briefcase full of lies and forgeries, then everything would have worked out perfectly. He would have married Jennifer, would have used her family money to stabilize his businesses, would have rebuilt his empire on proper foundations this time. But Lupita had to ruin it. Had to reveal that her mother had been secretly building a fortress around her, had to expose that every success Curtis thought he had earned was actually built on Estelle Long's hidden fortune. And now the whole world knew Curtis Slewa was a fraud, a parasite, a man who had lived off his wife's family money while pretending to be a self-made success. The rage that simmered in Curtis's gut had been building for weeks, fed by every rejection and humiliation, every moment when he had to accept that the life he wanted was gone forever. He had hired private investigators to follow Lupita, to document her movements and find some weakness he could exploit, some scandal he could threaten to expose that would force her to negotiate. The investigators had reported back that she was spending time with a contractor named Tyson Fox, meeting him at restaurants and taking walks along the river, laughing in ways she had never laughed with Curtis, even in their best moments together. The knowledge that she was moving on, that she was finding happiness while Curtis drowned in misery, was intolerable. She didn't get to be happy. She didn't get to walk away from their marriage and immediately find someone new while Curtis's entire life collapsed into rubble. There had to be a way to hurt her the way she had hurt him, to make her understand what it felt like to lose everything you thought defined your worth. He started making calls to the few contacts he had left, people who owed him favors or held grudges against Lupita's family, corrupt officials who could be convinced to make life difficult for someone if the price was right. The building inspector, who had always been willing to overlook code violations for the right amount of money, agreed to take a closer look at projects associated with Tyson Fox, to find problems that needed addressing immediately, to create bureaucratic nightmares that would cost time and money to resolve. Curtis couldn't attack Lupita directly anymore. Her mother's fortress was too strong for that, but he could hurt people she cared about. could demonstrate that associating with her came with consequences. Within days, Tyson's company found itself under intense scrutiny from city inspectors, with violations being cited on projects that had passed inspection just months earlier. Permits were being questioned and delayed. Contractors were receiving calls from anonymous sources warning them about working with someone who might have financial instability issues. Clients were getting nervous and threatening to take their business elsewhere. Curtis watched from a distance as problems multiplied, and he felt something close to satisfaction, knowing that even from his diminished position, he could still cause pain. The damage was real and immediate. Tyson's largest client, a hospital renovation project worth over $2 million, pulled their contract citing concerns about reliability. 2 other clients followed within the week. Tyson's company, which had been thriving, suddenly faced a cash flow crisis that threatened to spiral into bankruptcy if the bleeding didn't stop soon. He composed messages to Lupita that he never sent, drafts that cycled through threats and pleading and accusations, trying to find the right words that would make her understand how completely she had destroyed him. She had been nothing when he met her, just a girl with potential connections and a mother who had money. He had made her into someone, had elevated her social standing, had given her access to a world she never would have entered without him. And this was how she repaid his generosity, by stealing everything and leaving him with nothing but debts and ruined reputation. The final betrayal came when Curtis discovered through his remaining network that Lupita was planning to open a community center using the Riverside building, a project that would be publicly celebrated as a philanthropic gesture honoring her mother's memory. She would be lauded in the press as a generous benefactor helping women in need, would rebuild her public image as someone caring and thoughtful, would erase any suspicion that she had somehow stolen from her ex-husband by positioning herself as a victim who had triumphed over adversity. Curtis couldn't allow it, couldn't let her win so completely while he lost everything. He began planning how to disrupt the project, how to create problems that would be difficult and expensive to solve, how to turn public opinion against Lupita by planting stories with journalists about how she had used legal trickery to steal from her hard-working husband. The stories would be lies, or at least distortions of truth. But Curtis had learned that perception mattered more than reality in the court of public opinion. His phone rang with Jennifer's number, and for a moment, Curtis felt hope surge through his chest. Maybe she was calling to reconcile. Maybe her lawyers had been too harsh in their assessment. Maybe she still loved him enough to overlook his mistakes and give him another chance. He answered with voice carefully modulated to sound confident and warm, like everything was fine and he was just waiting for her to realize they belonged together. "Curtis, this is Jennifer's attorney. Ms. Kensington asked me to inform you that if you attempt to contact her again, through any means, we will file for a restraining order. Additionally, we are pursuing a civil suit for emotional distress and fraud related to your misrepresentation of your financial situation. You will be served with papers shortly. Any communication should go through your legal representation. Do not call this number again." The line went dead before Curtis could respond, could explain, could plead his case one more time. Jennifer was gone completely now, not just emotionally but legally, and she was taking more from him through lawsuits that would drag on for years and cost money he didn't have to defend against. Curtis hurled his phone across the room, watching it shatter against the cheap drywall, and he let out a scream of pure rage and frustration that his thin walls couldn't contain. His neighbors would probably complain to the landlord, another small humiliation to add to the growing pile, but he didn't care anymore. Everything was falling apart, and it was all Lupita's fault for not knowing her place, for not accepting what he had decided she deserved, for fighting back instead of quietly disappearing like she was supposed to. He would make her pay. He didn't know how yet, didn't have the resources or connections he once commanded, but he would find a way. Curtis Slewa didn't accept defeat, didn't let women destroy him without consequences, didn't go quietly into the shadows just because some dead woman had spent years building traps. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And Lupita Long would learn that humiliating Curtis Slewa came with a price that would be extracted one way or another, no matter how long it took or how many innocent people got hurt in the crossfire. He began searching through his contacts again, looking for anyone who might still owe him favors, anyone desperate or corrupt enough to help him hurt the woman who had stolen his future. And in his cramped studio apartment that smelled like failure and rage, Curtis Slewa started planning revenge that would be satisfying even if it was ultimately self-destructive. Because if he couldn't have the life he wanted, then Lupita didn't get to have happiness either. Chapter 8. When Protection Becomes War. Lupita learned about Curtis's attacks on Tyson through a tense phone call from Diane Rothford, who had gotten wind of the situation through her network of contacts in city government. Building inspectors were suddenly finding violations on projects that had been completed months ago. Permits were being delayed through bureaucratic red tape that appeared out of nowhere. And Tyson's clients were receiving anonymous warnings about working with a contractor who might have financial instability issues. The campaign was systematic and targeted, designed to damage his reputation and cost him money he would struggle to recover from. "This is Curtis," Diane said, her voice tight with anger that matched what Lupita was feeling. "He's trying to hurt you by destroying someone you care about, counting on you either abandoning Tyson to save him from further damage or spending resources to fight back that would otherwise go toward the community center. It's a strategy designed to hurt you emotionally while also disrupting your plans." Lupita sat in her hotel suite, hands clenched into fists as fury burned through her veins like acid. Curtis had already taken 10 years of her life, had already stolen her trust and manipulated her into isolating herself from everyone who loved her. Now he was trying to destroy Tyson, an innocent man whose only crime was showing basic human kindness to a woman trying to rebuild her life. The audacity of it, the sheer vindictive cruelty, made her want to scream until her voice gave out. "What can we do?" She forced the words through gritted teeth, fighting to stay calm and strategic when every instinct screamed for immediate violent action. "We fight back with everything your mother built." Diane's tone shifted from angry to grimly determined. The inspectors who suddenly developed concerns about Tyson's work. They've been accepting bribes from developers for years, looking the other way on actual safety issues for the right price. I know this because your mother documented their corruption when she was investigating the network of people Curtis used for his schemes. We can expose them, get them investigated by internal affairs, make their lives very difficult very quickly. Do it. Lupita didn't hesitate. Curtis wanted war, thought he could attack people she cared about without consequences. He was about to learn that the empire her mother built wasn't just defensive walls. It was also weapons that could be deployed when necessary. But when Lupita called Tyson to tell him help was coming, his response wasn't what she expected. "I appreciate the thought, Lupita, but I need to handle this myself." His voice was tight, strained in ways she had never heard before. "I can't have you swooping in to save my business every time your ex-husband decides to cause problems. What happens next time? And the time after that? Do I just become another thing you need to manage and protect?" "That's not what this is," she protested, but even as she said it, she wondered if he was right. Was she trying to help, or was she trying to control the situation the way Curtis had controlled everything in their marriage? "I lost the hospital contract today," Tyson continued, and she could hear exhaustion and frustration bleeding through. $2 million gone because someone made a phone call suggesting I might not finish the job. My foreman is talking about leaving because he's worried the company won't survive. Simone asked me why we're not seeing you anymore, and I didn't know what to tell her because honestly, Lupita, I'm not sure this is working." The words hit like a physical blow. What do you mean, it's not working? That is it. I mean, I can't be in a relationship where my life becomes collateral damage in someone else's war. I care about you, but I also have a daughter to think about, employees who depend on me, a business I spent years building. Curtis isn't going to stop, and you can't keep using your resources to fix everything he breaks. At some point, I have to ask myself if being with you is worth watching everything I've worked for get destroyed. The conversation ended badly, with Tyson needing space to think, and Lupita feeling like she was losing something precious before she had even fully found it. She sat in her hotel room staring at her phone, Curtis's manipulation reaching across distance to poison yet another part of her life, and she understood with sickening clarity that this was exactly what he wanted. To isolate her again, to make her toxic to anyone who tried to get close, to ensure that even her mother's empire couldn't protect her from loneliness. The clients receiving warnings need to hear from someone they trust that Tyson Fox is one of the most reliable contractors in the city, that his work is exemplary, and that the sudden scrutiny is politically motivated harassment. Diane was already making lists, her voice taking on the efficient clip of someone executing a battle plan. Nods, I'll reach out personally to everyone on his client list, use my reputation to vouch for him. Anyone who continues spreading Curtis's lies will find themselves cut off from opportunities in commercial development across the region. Over the next 3 weeks, Diane worked her network relentlessly, while Lupita felt helpless, watching Tyson pull away emotionally, even as she tried to fix the damage Curtis had caused. The building inspectors who had targeted Tyson's projects were eventually suspended pending investigation, but the process was slow and bureaucratic. Diane's calls to Tyson's clients helped stabilize some relationships, but the hospital contract was gone permanently, and 2 other clients had already signed with competitors. Tyson's company survived, but barely, and the financial hit would take months to recover from. And through it all, Tyson maintained a polite distance that felt worse than anger would have. He answered her calls, but kept conversations brief and professional. He stopped initiating contact. He made excuses when she suggested getting together. Simone asked about her once in a text message that Tyson forwarded without comment. Is Lupita okay? Did we do something wrong? Lupita spent those weeks in a spiral of doubt and self-recrimination. Maybe Tyson was right. Maybe she did bring too much chaos into people's lives. Maybe Curtis would never stop attacking anyone who got close to her. Maybe she should have just stayed alone, building her community center and honoring her mother's legacy without dragging innocent people into the wreckage of her failed marriage. When Curtis's ability to cause immediate damage finally diminished as the corrupt officials were removed from their positions, Lupita felt no sense of victory. Tyson's company had been wounded. Their relationship had fractured, and she had learned that having resources to fight back didn't mean winning came without cost. Curtis started posting on social media, long rambling screeds about how the legal system was rigged against honest businessmen, how his ex-wife was using dirty family money to persecute him, how Jennifer Kensington had betrayed their love for mercenary financial reasons. Each post made him look more desperate and delusional to anyone reading, and his remaining professional reputation shredded further with every public breakdown. His lawyer finally quit after Curtis showed up drunk at her office, demanding she file motions to have Estelle Long's documents thrown out on grounds that made no legal sense, ranting about conspiracies and witchcraft until security had to escort him out. Lupita watched Curtis's public deterioration with emotions too complex to easily name. Part of her felt satisfaction seeing him experience consequences for his actions, seeing him lose the facade of success and confidence he had maintained through manipulating everyone around him. Another part felt something almost like pity for how completely he was falling apart, how his entire identity had been so wrapped up in wealth and status that losing them meant losing any sense of who he was underneath the performance. But mostly, she felt a bone-deep exhaustion from the realization that Curtis's capacity to cause harm extended far beyond their marriage, reaching out to hurt anyone who dared to care about her. She thought about Tyson's silence, about the polite distance he had been maintaining, and she knew she couldn't let things end this way, even if ending was inevitable. She showed up at his house on a Saturday morning, knowing Simone was at a marine biology camp and they would have privacy for the conversation that needed to happen. Tyson answered the door looking tired, older somehow than he had just weeks earlier, and the wariness in his eyes when he saw her felt like a knife between her ribs. "We need to talk," she said. "Really talk, not the polite professional conversations we've been having." He let her in, offered coffee that she declined, and they sat in his living room with careful space between them on the couch. The house felt different now, less welcoming. Or maybe that was just her own fear coloring everything. "I'm sorry," Lupita started, and Tyson shook his head. "You don't have anything to apologize for. Curtis is the one who attacked my company, not you." "But he attacked you because of me," she countered, "and I handled it badly. I immediately tried to fix everything with money and resources instead of asking what you needed, instead of treating you like a partner capable of making his own decisions. I did exactly what Curtis did to me for 10 years. I made choices for someone else because I thought I knew better." Tyson was quiet for a long moment. "I appreciate you saying that. And for what it's worth, I understand why you reacted the way you did. You were trying to protect someone you care about. That's not wrong, but it hurt you anyway," Lupita said softly. "And the way you pulled away these past weeks, I thought maybe you had decided I wasn't worth the trouble. That maybe you were done with all the drama that comes with being connected to me." "I thought about it," Tyson admitted, and the honesty stung even though she had asked for it. "I sat with Simone one night after she asked about you, and I thought about what it would mean to keep building this relationship. Curtis isn't going to stop being a problem just because we want him to. He's going to keep finding ways to lash out, keep trying to hurt you by hurting people around you. And I have to think about whether I can handle that, whether it's fair to Simone to bring that kind of chaos into her life." "And what did you decide?" Lupita's voice was barely a whisper. "I decided that running away from something good because it's complicated is the coward's choice," Tyson said, finally meeting her eyes fully. "But I also decided that if we're going to do this, we need to do it differently. I can't be someone you rescue. I need to be your partner, which means we make decisions together, even when you have resources I don't, even when you think you know the best way to fix something. We talk first, we decide together, or this won't work." "I can do that," Lupita said quickly, desperately. "I want to do that. I don't want to be the person who makes decisions for other people. I spent too many years having decisions made for me. And I need you to understand that there might be times when the answer is that I need to handle something myself, even if that means it takes longer or costs more or doesn't work out as well as it would if you intervened." Tyson's voice was gentle but firm. "My ego took a hit these past weeks, watching my business struggle while knowing you could probably fix everything with a phone call. That's hard for me to swallow, and I need you to respect that sometimes I'll choose to do things the hard way, because I need to prove to myself that I can." "Even if Curtis attacks again?" Lupita asked. "Even then. We'll figure it out together, but you don't get to just swoop in and solve everything without talking to me first." He paused, then added, "And honestly, Lupita, there might come a point where I can't handle it anymore, where the cost of being with you is too high, and I have to choose Simone's stability over our relationship. I need you to know that's a possibility, even though I hope it never comes to that." The words settled heavy between them, the acknowledgement that love might not be enough if the circumstances became impossible. It was the opposite of the fairy tale promises Curtis had made, the guarantees that everything would be perfect forever. This was real, messy, uncertain, two people trying to figure out if they could build something sustainable in the middle of ongoing chaos. "I understand," Lupita said. And she did, even though it terrified her. I'd rather have honesty and uncertainty than false promises. And I'd rather know now that you might have to walk away than pretend that could never happen. They sat in silence for a while, the air between them slowly shifting from tense to something more breathable. Not fixed, not perfect, but maybe possible. "Simone misses you," Tyson said finally. "She's been asking when you're coming over again. I told her we were figuring some things out, but that I hoped it would be soon." "I miss her too," Lupita admitted. "I miss both of you. These past weeks have felt like losing something I didn't get enough time to properly have." "Then let's try again," Tyson said. "Slower this time, with better communication, with boundaries we both actually respect. No guarantees, no promises about forever, just two people choosing to keep showing up for each other, despite the complications." It wasn't the romantic reconciliation Lupita had hoped for. It was better, honest, grounded, acknowledging reality without pretending love conquered all. They were going to try again, and they might fail. And that uncertainty was both terrifying and somehow more trustworthy than any certainty Curtis had ever offered. Tyson had handled the whole situation with more complexity than Lupita had expected. When she called to warn him about Curtis's attacks and offer resources to fight back, his initial frustration had been difficult to hear. His doubts about their relationship had shaken her to the core. But after their honest conversation, after they had acknowledged the mess they were navigating together, something had shifted. They were rebuilding trust slowly, carefully, with more honesty than comfort. "I'm still working through my feelings about how everything went down," he told her during one of their careful conversations as they tried to find their way back to each other. "Part of me is grateful that you had the resources to help. Another part resents needing help at all. And a third part is just tired of thinking about Curtis Sliwa and wants to focus on us without his shadow always looming. I don't have it all figured out yet." The admission made her cry, tears streaming down her face because Curtis had never acknowledged his own confusion or uncertainty. "I don't have it figured out either," she said through tears. "I'm terrified of repeating patterns from my marriage with Curtis. I'm terrified of making you feel small the way he made me feel. I'm terrified that I'm too damaged to have a healthy relationship. I don't know how to do this." "Then we figure it out together," Tyson said, echoing what he had told her before. "We make mistakes and talk about them. We notice when old patterns are showing up and call them out. We set boundaries and respect them. We try to be honest, even when honesty is scary. Neither of us has to be perfect, Lupita. We just have to keep showing up and doing the work." They had started spending time together again, carefully rebuilding what Curtis's attacks had damaged. When Tyson finally felt ready to bring Lupita back into Simone's life, the 12-year-old had questions that cut straight to the heart of things. "Dad said you guys had to work through some complicated stuff," Simone said during their first meal together after the weeks of distance. "He wouldn't tell me what exactly, but I could tell he was sad when you weren't around. Are you going to disappear again?" The directness was startling, but also refreshing, after so many careful conversations with adults who danced around difficult topics. "I hope not," Lupita answered honestly. "Your dad and I are trying to figure out how to be together in a way that's healthy for both of us, and that means sometimes we need space to think about things. But I'm not planning to disappear. I care about both of you too much for that." Simone studied her with the assessing gaze Lupita remembered from their first meeting. "Okay, but if you hurt him again, I'm going to be really mad at you. He deserves someone who's not going to mess with his head." "You're absolutely right," Lupita said, taking the warning seriously. "And I'm trying my best not to mess with anyone's head, including my own. But I might make mistakes because I'm still learning how to be in a relationship that's actually healthy. When that happens, I hope you'll tell me if you notice." Simone had seemed satisfied with that answer, then launched into her octopus intelligence explanations with the same enthusiasm as before. And Lupita felt something in her chest unclench slightly. They were finding their way back, messily and imperfectly. but with more honesty than any relationship Lupita had experienced before. The Riverside building project was moving forward with momentum that felt both exciting and terrifying. Architects had finalized designs that honored the industrial history while creating modern spaces for job training and counseling. Contractors were preparing to begin renovation work that would transform empty factory floors into classrooms and offices and childcare facilities. Lupita had hired staff who brought their own experiences of survival and rebuilding, women who understood what it meant to start over after losing everything, and could offer more than textbook sympathy to clients who would walk through these doors desperate for help. Diane had connected Lupita with board members from across the city, people who brought expertise in non-profit management and fundraising and community outreach. They had named the facility the Estelle Long Community Center, and plans were underway for an opening ceremony that would celebrate her mother's legacy while announcing a new resource for women who needed support. Howard Mitchells attended meetings with quiet satisfaction, watching Lupita transform from uncertain client to confident leader, making decisions about budgets and hiring and program development. "Your mother would be so proud," he told her after one particularly successful board meeting. "She always said you had more strength than you realized, more vision than Curtis allowed you to express. She was waiting for you to remember who you really were underneath all the lies he told you about yourself." In stolen moments between meetings and planning sessions and phone calls with lawyers about Curtis's continued harassment, Lupita read the remaining letters her mother had left in the briefcase. Each one addressed a different fear or doubt or stage of the healing journey, and Estelle's words felt like having her mother back for brief, precious conversations they had never gotten to have in life. One letter in particular had made Lupita sob until she thought she might break completely. "Baby girl, by the time you read this, I will be gone, and you will probably be angry with me for dying without reconciliation between us. Know that I died in peace because I trusted that you would survive Curtis, that you would discover your own power, that you would build something beautiful from the ashes of what he destroyed. I'm not angry with you for choosing him over me. I understand that you needed to learn some lessons through experience because no amount of warning would have been enough. I only wish I could be there to see the woman you become after this transformation, to watch you build empire, not just with money, but with purpose and compassion and the fierce determination that runs in your blood. Love yourself as much as I loved you. That's all I ever wanted." Lupita had the letter framed and hung in her hotel suite where she could see it every morning, a reminder that even in death, her mother was still teaching her how to be strong. The final legal proceedings with Curtis were scheduled for the following month, the moment when everything would be formally settled, and she would walk away, free from any remaining ties to the man who had consumed 10 years of her life. Howard predicted Curtis would walk away with approximately $8 million in legitimate debts he had accumulated, no assets, and a reputation so damaged he would spend the next decade rebuilding basic credibility. He would have to sell everything he actually owned just to pay down part of what he owed, would have to start over from almost nothing in his late 40s, would experience firsthand the powerlessness he had spent years inflicting on his wife. He brought this on himself. Howard reminded her when Lupita expressed something that might have been concern about Curtis's complete destruction. Every choice he made, every lie he told, every person he manipulated and discarded, all of it led here. You didn't create these consequences. You just stopped protecting him from them. Lupita knew he was right intellectually, but emotionally it was harder to separate herself from the wreckage of Curtis's life, even though she hadn't caused it. She had loved him once, or at least loved who she thought he was, and watching anyone fall so completely carried weight, even when they deserved the fall. But she was learning to let go of responsibility for Curtis's choices and consequences, learning to focus on building something positive rather than dwelling on what had been destroyed, learning that the best revenge wasn't causing Curtis pain, but creating a life so full of purpose and joy that his presence became irrelevant rather than central. The woman she was becoming felt both familiar and brand new, someone who carried echoes of the girl she had been before Curtis, but was shaped by everything she had survived. Stronger, wiser, more careful about where she placed her trust, but not hardened beyond the ability to love deeply when someone proved themselves worthy. And as she stood in the riverside building, watching construction crews begin the transformation her mother had envisioned, Lupita understood that the empire Estelle built was never really about money or properties or investments. It was about giving her daughter the tools to build whatever life she wanted, free from anyone who would try to make her smaller than she was meant to be. The Queen was rising, and her crown was forged from lessons learned the hard way. Chapter 9. The Final Confrontation. The cold December morning felt appropriate for endings. The sky grey and heavy with clouds that threatened snow but hadn't yet delivered. Lupita was at the Riverside building meeting with architects and community organizers when security radioed that Curtis Sliwa was forcing his way past the entrance, pushing through the doors despite being told he wasn't authorized to be on the property. Her first instinct was to leave through a back exit, to avoid confrontation and let security handle removing him. But something in her had changed over the past months. She was done running from Curtis, done letting him dictate her movements through fear or avoidance. "Tell security to let him in, but stay close," she said into the radio, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'll meet him on the factory floor." The architects and organizers looked concerned, but followed her instructions, moving to the second level where they could observe but give space for what was clearly going to be a private confrontation. Tyson was supposed to join the meeting later, but Lupita texted him to come now. Not because she needed protection, but because she wanted him present, wanted Curtis to see that she had moved on, that his power over her had ended completely. Curtis appeared through the entrance like a ghost of the man he used to be. His clothes wrinkled and cheap, his face gaunt with stress that had carved lines into his features and hollowed out his cheeks. His eyes carried wildness that might have frightened her a year ago, but now just looked desperate and pathetic, the thrashing of someone drowning who had finally realized no rescue was coming. Lupita. Her name came out broken, barely recognizable as language. "We need to talk. This has all gone too far, and we need to figure out how to fix it before everything falls apart completely." Everything already fell apart, Curtis. Months ago, you just didn't notice because you were too busy planning your new life with Jennifer to care about the debris you were leaving behind. Her voice was calm, factual, empty of the emotion he had probably expected. Tyson arrived through the side entrance, moving to stand beside Lupita, not in front of her. His presence a statement that she had support but didn't need rescue. Curtis looked at him with naked hatred, seeing in Tyson everything he had failed to be, genuine, honest. Someone who made Lupita feel valued rather than used. "This is your fault," Curtis said, and the words tumbled out in a rush of accusations and self-pity. "Everything I built, everything I achieved, you took it all because you couldn't handle me finding someone who actually understood ambition. Your mother poisoned your mind against me from the beginning, planted lies and paranoid delusions, and you were too weak to think for yourself. I loved you, Lupita. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me, by destroying my life, by taking another man before our divorce was even finalized." Tyson tensed beside her, and she felt him preparing to step forward to defend her against Curtis's twisted version of reality. But she put a hand on his arm to stop him because this was her confrontation, her moment to say things that needed saying before she could truly move forward. "You never loved me." The words came out clear and final, carrying through the cavernous space like a bell announcing truth. "You loved what you thought you could take from me, what I represented for your ambitions. You saw a young woman whose mother had resources and connections, and you saw a tool you could use to build your empire. Every success you celebrated was built on a foundation my mother constructed to protect me from exactly what you turned out to be. Curtis opened his mouth to argue, but Lupita continued, her voice growing stronger with each sentence. You spent 10 years systematically destroying my confidence, making me doubt my own mind and my own worth, convincing me that I was lucky you stayed despite my inadequacies. You isolated me from everyone who loved me, made me believe my mother was the enemy when she was the only one seeing clearly. You manipulated me into signing papers I didn't understand, used my trust as a weapon against me, treated me like an obstacle to be managed rather than a partner to be valued. I had to sell everything, Curtis interrupted, his voice cracking with genuine anguish. My cars, my watches, my art, everything that proved I was someone who mattered. I'm living in a studio apartment where I can hear my neighbors fighting through walls so thin they might as well not exist. I'm working for a company I used to compete against, taking orders from men who used to beg for my attention. Jennifer won't even speak to me. My business partners are suing me. My reputation is destroyed beyond any hope of recovery. I have nothing left, Lupita, nothing. And you're standing here in a building you own, planning projects with money you inherited, holding hands with some contractor like I never existed, like our marriage meant nothing. The entitlement in his words was staggering. The belief that his suffering was somehow her responsibility to prevent or alleviate. He genuinely seemed to think she should feel guilty about his consequences, should be grateful that he was still paying attention to her after everything he had put her through. Tyson finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying weight that came from building things that lasted rather than constructing facades that crumbled. She doesn't owe you comfort for the pain you caused yourself. She doesn't owe you forgiveness you haven't earned and probably never will. And she definitely doesn't owe you a second of her time or attention while you perform this pathetic show of victimhood. You had a woman who loved you completely, who would have stood beside you through anything real, who gave you everything she was for 10 years. You threw that away for money and status and your own ego. Now you get to live with that choice. Now you get to be the man you actually are instead of the illusion you constructed. So no, Curtis, you don't get her sympathy. You don't get her guilt. You don't get her at all anymore. That ship sailed when you laughed at her pain. Curtis looked at Tyson with pure hatred, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. And for a moment, Lupita thought he might actually try to start a physical fight. But even in his desperation, Curtis understood that violence would only make things worse, would give them grounds for restraining orders and assault charges that would bury him even deeper. You don't get to rewrite history, Lupita said, drawing Curtis's attention back to her. You don't get to pretend you were a loving husband whose wife betrayed him. The truth is, in documents and recordings and testimony from people who watched you manipulate and gaslight me for a decade, the truth is that every asset you claimed as your success actually belonged to the woman you were discarding like trash. The truth is that you are facing consequences you earned through your own choices. And those consequences have nothing to do with me, except that I finally stopped protecting you from them. I did love you. Curtis's voice dropped to something almost vulnerable, tears streaming down his face that might have been genuine, or might have been one final manipulation. In my way, I loved you. I just didn't know how to love someone more than I loved success and status and the feeling of being important. And by the time I figured out the difference, by the time I understood what I was throwing away, it was too late. I'm sorry, Lupita. I'm so sorry for everything I did and everything I failed to be. The apology landed in the space between them like a fragile thing made of glass, beautiful and broken and impossible to fully trust. Lupita looked at the man who had been her husband, who had shared her bed and her life and her dreams for 10 years, and she felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not love, not even hate. Just emptiness where he used to live in her heart. a space that was slowly filling with other things but would never belong to Curtis Slewa again. "I hope you find a way to rebuild your life," she said finally, and she meant it with the distant compassion of someone who had moved beyond personal investment. "I hope you learn something from losing everything, that you become a better person than you were. But that journey is yours to make, and I'm not part of it anymore. Security is going to escort you out now, and if you ever approach me again, if you ever try to contact me or anyone I care about, I will file for a restraining order and press charges for harassment. You don't exist in my life anymore, Curtis. You're just a lesson I learned about who not to trust." The security team moved in, professional and efficient, and Curtis allowed himself to be led toward the exit. But he turned back one last time, his face wet with tears and twisted with emotions too complex to easily name. "I did love you," he said again, and maybe it was true in whatever broken way he understood love. "I just loved the wrong things more." Then he was gone, walking out of the Riverside building and out of her life for the final time. And Lupita felt something release in her chest that she hadn't even known was still bound tight. The weight of carrying Curtis's presence in her mind lifted slightly, making room for air and space and the possibility of breathing without the constant pressure of his manipulation pressing down on her lungs. Tyson wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth, letting herself be supported without feeling weak for needing support. The architects and organizers came down from the second level, their faces showing concern and respect for what they had witnessed, understanding that they had seen the end of a story that had nearly destroyed her. "That was incredibly brave," Diane said, appearing from wherever she had been observing. Facing him directly, telling him the truth, refusing to let him rewrite what happened. "Your mother would have been proud of how you handled that." Lupita wasn't sure she felt brave. She felt exhausted, wrung out, like she had just climbed a mountain only to discover another peak waiting beyond. But she had done it, had faced Curtis Slewa one final time and walked away still standing, still whole, still herself despite everything he had tried to take from her. "Can we get back to work?" she asked, her voice steady again. "We have a community center to build, and I'm done letting Curtis Slewa steal any more of my time or energy." And as the group returned to discussions of construction timelines and program development, as Tyson's hand found hers and squeezed gently, as the winter sun finally broke through clouds to illuminate the factory floor with light that felt like blessing, Lupita understood that this was what closure looked like. Not dramatic or cathartic or perfectly satisfying, just the quiet determination to keep building forward despite the wreckage left behind. The confrontation was over. The marriage was truly ended, and Lupita Long was finally completely free. Chapter 10. The Empire She Built with Love. The spring morning arrived warm and bright, the kind of weather that felt like the universe approving of new beginnings. Lupita stood at the entrance to the Estelle Long Community Center, watching people arrive for the opening ceremony, her heart full of emotions too complex to name. The Riverside building had been transformed into something that honored its industrial past, while creating spaces designed for healing and growth. Brick walls restored to their original beauty, massive windows letting in floods of natural light, modern additions integrated seamlessly with historic architecture. Nearly 2 years had passed since the divorce papers were signed, years that felt both impossibly long and startlingly brief. Time enough for wounds to begin healing, but not enough to forget how they were made. Diane Rothford stood beside her, elegant in flowing clothes that caught the breeze. "Your mother dreamed of this moment for years," she said quietly. "She imagined standing here with you. She would be so proud of what you've built." "We built it together," Lupita corrected gently. "She gave me the foundation, but you and Howard and Tyson and everyone else helped make it real." I couldn't have done this alone. The ceremony began with speeches from board members and community leaders, people talking about the need for resources that helped women rebuild their lives. Then Lupita took the microphone, looking out at faces that included reporters and donors and staff members who would run programs, and she felt her mother's presence like a hand on her shoulder. My mother, Estelle Long, spent the last decade of her life building an empire in secret, she began. She did it to protect me from someone who saw me as a resource to exploit rather than a person to value. She did it knowing that when I finally needed the protection she had constructed, our relationship might be damaged beyond repair. She chose love over certainty, chose to build walls around a daughter who had stopped speaking to her rather than abandoning me to face consequences alone. Lupita paused, gathering emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. I wasted years being angry with her for not understanding my choices, for questioning the man I married, for setting boundaries I saw as controlling rather than protective. I thought she was the enemy keeping me from happiness, when really she was the only one seeing clearly. And she loved me enough to let me learn hard lessons while ensuring those lessons wouldn't destroy me completely. The crowd was silent, attentive. This center exists because my mother understood that women need more than good intentions. They need practical resources, job training, legal support, childcare, mental health counseling, and a community of people who understand what they're going through. The programs we're offering are designed to give women tools and power and choices. She gestured toward the building. Every woman who walks through these doors will be treated with dignity regardless of her circumstances. We won't judge how she got here. We'll meet her where she is and help her build toward where she wants to be. That's what my mother did for me. That's what we'll do for every woman who needs this place. The crowd erupted in applause. The first group of women enrolled in programs began their tour, and watching them walk through spaces that had been empty factory floor made everything feel real in ways blueprints hadn't captured. Tyson found her in the crowd, Simone beside him. "You did good," he said simply. "We did good," Lupita corrected. Simone tugged on her sleeve. "Can I show my marine biology teacher what you built? She's always talking about women in science needing role models. This place absolutely counts," Lupita assured her. "Bring your teacher anytime." Howard Mitchells appeared through the crowd. Estelle would be dancing if she could see this. "You honored her legacy better than she could have hoped." "I wish she could be here," Lupita said. "She is here," Howard assured her. "In every brick restored, every program designed to help women find their power." The months since the confrontation had passed in blur of construction deadlines and staff hiring. The legal proceedings had concluded as Howard predicted, with Curtis walking away, buried in debt. He had taken a job managing logistics, work that paid bills, but offered none of the status he had built his identity around. Lupita heard updates occasionally, suggesting Curtis was slowly rebuilding a smaller life. Jennifer Kensington had settled her lawsuit, then made a substantial donation to the center with a note, "Thank you for the warning I didn't know I needed." Lupita had moved out of the hotel, purchasing a historic house near the river. Tyson had helped with the renovation, and gradually his presence had become permanent, though it hadn't been smooth. They still argued sometimes about decisions, still had moments when old patterns surfaced. There were nights when Tyson worked late because business was recovering from Curtis's attacks, when financial stress made him withdrawn. There were mornings when Lupita woke panicking about repeating mistakes. But they kept working on it, kept showing up for difficult conversations, kept choosing each other even when it was hard. They hadn't formally married, comfortable with ambiguity after their previous marriages. The rings they wore were statements of commitment without legal entanglement. Simone had become something like a daughter, a fierce, smart young woman who taught Lupita about octopuses while asking questions that showed wisdom beyond years. As the ceremony concluded, Lupita found a quiet moment on the rooftop garden. The city spread out below her, and she thought about all the women who would stand in this same spot over coming years. Her phone buzzed. I saw the news coverage. It looks like an incredible accomplishment. I hope you're happy, Lupita. Curtis. She read it twice, surprised it didn't trigger anger, just distant acknowledgement. She didn't respond, simply deleted it. He didn't get to be part of her story anymore. Tyson appeared with coffee. Simone wants to know if we can adopt a dog. Lupita laughed. A dog feels like exactly the kind of normal family decision I never thought I'd get to make. They stood together, watching the sun begin its descent, and Lupita felt something settle in her chest that she recognized as contentment. The empire Estelle long built in secret had transformed into an empire of light. The briefcase had contained more than documents and money. It had contained a mother's love that transcended death and distance. Curtis Sliwa had taken 10 years of her life, but he hadn't taken everything. Her capacity for love, her determination to build something meaningful, her strength that had been hidden under manipulation but never destroyed, all of it remained. She thought about the plaque in the center's entrance hall. To every woman who has been told she is too much or not enough, you are exactly right as you are. Your strength doesn't require permission. Build your empire, love fiercely, protect yourself wisely, and never let anyone convince you that their comfort matters more than your truth. Welcome home. The words were for every woman who would walk through those doors, but they were also for Lupita herself. The empire she never knew she had inherited became the empire she built with purpose and love. And standing on that rooftop, Lupita Long understood that she had finally become the queen her mother always knew she would be. Not because of wealth or properties, but because she had survived betrayal and discovered that strength was something she carried inside. The crown was hers, and she wore it with grace earned through every hard lesson, every moment of doubt, every choice to keep building forward. This was just the beginning, and the future was hers to write.